inviting me to be here. And I thought I would start off with some key unanswerable questions as we sat here in November of 2011. These are questions that I would like to ask the people that represent us in Washington, D.C. on behalf of the real estate industry. Yeah, I was a licensed broker. I had a GRI designation, had a CRB designation. My first designation was SOB. I was the son of a broker. And so I know the business. I attended my first NAR convention in Houston back in 1976. So I've been around the business quite a while. These are the questions that just don't seem to have an answer, and I get paid to think about these every day. That's my job, is to try to answer these. And I can't find the answers to them. If job growth is such a key to our future, why aren't we developing policies to encourage hiring? Why do we allow China to continue to cheat on their currency and steal all of our jobs and our wealth? If housing is such a key headwind to job growth, why haven't we fixed Franny? I don't call them Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac anymore. They're just homogenized government entities buried in the bowels of government. I used to sell houses back when Fannie and Freddie worked. It was real simple. There was no mortgage underwriting problems. I did that right in my office, in my car, before I took my clients out. I said, we had ratios, income ratios, 28%, 36%. Either you fit those ratios or you didn't. And once we figured out what you could buy, we went out and sold your house. I didn't have to worry about a mortgage underwriter underwriting my mortgage. It was a done deal when I walked in the door. I don't understand why we haven't. Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac failed years ago. They started failing back in 2005 and 2006 and completely failed in 2008 and 2009. And here we are 2 years later and they haven't accomplished a thing. Every economist in the country agrees that single-family housing is the key headwind against our economic recovery. So they need to fix housing. That's going to be one of the issues I want to talk about in detail today. It's probably the fundamental issue. What will our government do to get out of the way to allow people to sell homes, find mortgages for homes, and give people courage and confidence to buy a home again going forward? Simple issue is, if you had a lot of economists behind me in the room, they would all agree that by this point in this stage of the economic recovery, we should be generating a lot of jobs. And we're not. And the reason they say, well, I don't understand that. We should be doing that. Well, here's why. Because at this stage of an economic downturn, when you're barely getting started for the next recovery, housing leads the way. And specifically, new home construction. And that's not happening this time. So I want to deal with that a little bit later. I'll put quite a few numbers on the table, quite a bit of meat on the bones there. If housing is the key headwind, why aren't we foreclosing on $4.5 million houses and selling them to investors? I asked Ron and Sana that at a TAR convention a couple of months ago back in Austin. I said, Ron, in a Q&A, why wouldn't we just go ahead and foreclose on these 4.5 million homes and create some programs to encourage investors to buy these and allow the market to clear so that people have courage to buy homes again? He was honest in his answer in front of all the TAR people when he said, well, Mark, what you're describing is kind of like the RTC, which happened in the 1980s. And during the RTC, some people made a lot of money. I thought that was quite honest. The bottom line is, people that think like that would rather have no housing recovery, no economic recovery, rather than let investors buy 10 or 100 single-family homes and get tax benefits out of it. So that's kind of what we're dealing with today. The other issue is that the banking system, I don't think, is prepared to take the losses on those homes yet. Our banking system is very weak. It's not as weak as Europe, but it's very weak. And I think that's another reason they won't foreclose on these 4.5 million homes, is because when they do that, they take losses And our government doesn't have government regulators at the FDIC don't have enough money to cover those losses. That's where we developed the concept of what's known as extend and pretend. I'll extend your loan and pretend it's solvent. And then that morphed into, we'll extend all your loans and pretend our bank is solvent. And then that extended to, we'll pretend all of these banks are solvent also. And so that's part of the reason in my mind why we're not selling these homes. I was calling that the grand social experiment for about 5 years when we decided to try to make the home ownership rate go from whatever it was, 64% to 69%, whatever the numbers were, those are easily available. By making properties available to people with no income, no job, no credit, no documentation. That was a grand social experiment. And I remember at the time saying, wow, this is going to be interesting to see how this grand social experiment paid out. Well, it failed completely. Okay? So what we did was we swung 5% of the American people into houses as we increased the home ownership rate from 64 to 69, whatever it was. We swung 5% of the American people into a house that they probably should have never bought in the first place. And now all we have to do, it's very simple. We have to swing those 5% of the American households back into rental housing. And we can either do it in 1 year and clear the market, or we can do it over a decade. Doesn't matter, it will happen. The trick is, until that does happen, the housing market's not going to clear. People that buy homes are pretty smart. American people are very smart. Even though they're misled by the people in Washington, D.C., that tell them otherwise, the American people know what's going on. They know there's 4.5 to 6 million homes that are going to be foreclosed on in the next several years, and they're afraid to buy homes until that happens. Why are they afraid of that? Because if you sell 4.5 to 6 million homes in a short period of time, they're worried that prices will fall. See, that's not necessarily a Texas issue. We didn't have a bunch of home equity lending like they've had in other parts of the country. So you can think to yourself, I'm in San Antonio, I'm in Texas, that's no deal to me. Well, it will be a deal to you if you can't get any mortgage lending. It is a deal to you today if you talk to mortgage underwriters and they tell you they're not going to ever make a $50,000 mortgage again because these regulations that are coming out of Washington are making the loans too expensive to make. And not only that, but they don't want to make even bigger loans up to even $100,000 possibly, because not only is the cost to comply with all this regulation getting higher. I asked a couple of these I had about 10 or 12 mortgage underwriters in my office about a month ago and said, I want to know why we can't get home mortgages. And one of the guys told me straight up, he goes, I'll tell you, I asked him, I said, what I don't understand is that FHA has a minimum FICO score of about 630, but I just read recently that their book of business of Loans X down the road had a FICO score average of 730. How's that working out? What's happening to all these people that are lower than 730 but above the 630? Why aren't people getting loans for those? And the guy's answer was pretty simple. That's us. Because with these new regulations in Dodd-Frank, when we underwrite an FHA loan, if it goes bad and FHA loses money, we can be fined up to $30,000 personally for that loan. So we're not going to make them. You see, a lot of people in the country don't care whether you get a $50,000 loan or a $100,000 loan. If you live in the West Coast, you can't buy anything for $100,000. Who cares? But I just gave a speech in Laredo a couple of weeks ago, and a $50,000 loan used to get somebody in a house. Well, you can forget it now with Dodd-Frank, the way things are going right now. And you can forget it when these regulations, they're going to come after mortgage lenders if they make a bad loan. Think about that. You make a loan, and it goes bad. I don't know what you make on an individual loan, probably not a whole lot. And that thing goes bad, and the FHA has to take it back, and they come after you personally for $30,000. No wonder nobody with a FICO score below 730 is getting a loan. See, these are the unintended consequences of government involvement in American business. So, our trick going forward is we got 5% of the American people into a house they never should have bought in the first place. It was an interesting social experiment, and now what we need to do is create policies to get those people into rental situations as quickly as possible. And how you do that is you foreclose on those properties and you create positive incentives for investors to buy those homes so the prices don't decline. We know how to do that. I'm going to get into that later in this presentation. Here's some other unanswerable questions I can't get. Low interest rates are empowering the elderly and retirees in America, impoverishing them. Who's being helped by zero interest rates? My mother's annuity, she's 87 years old now, had a 8-year annuity with New York Life. 3 years, it went for 5 3/4 till it reset, and it reset 2 months ago, and now it's 1.5%. She's not unique. Lots of people around the country, elderly and retirees, are having exactly the same experience. What would you call that if your income level dropped by 75%? I call that being impoverished. Our elderly and savers in this country are paying an enormous price for this Federal Reserve policy of keeping interest rates at nothing. And I ask you, who's being benefited by that? Another unanswerable question is this. These are mine, but I tell you, I'm working out in the public 100 times a year, 15 years in a row. I've talked to almost 165,000 people now. And these are just questions I hear on the road day to day. Here's a fundamental question for you. How big of a crisis will it take for Congress to develop a credible plan to balance the budget? I can tell you, I'm not exaggerating one shred, that there is absolutely no one in this country that believes Congress will balance the budget. I got criticized last year because I had at the end of my speech a good scenario and a bad scenario. And the good scenario was predicated on Congress doing something right. And people, one after another, would come up to me and say, all of your slides are right except your good scenario, because it won't happen. It will not happen. Well, it didn't. Okay? So my bad scenario is unfolding, which is Congress will not do anything of substance until after the 2012 election. And you know what? That's 12 months from now. That's an awful long time for business owners to have to wait and wonder what their future's going to look like. Here's another question for you. Where do you invest your savings in this nightmare environment? You buy gold? I've told people for years that if it's up to me, my recommendation, I would tell you, if you're even thinking about buying gold, I would recommend you just take cocaine instead, because at least you'll feel good before it kills you. That's not an official Texas A&M position, by the way. And for full disclosure, I've never actually taken cocaine, but I did see Pulp Fiction one time. I was kind of looking at it like this. I couldn't hardly stay through the movie. So where do you invest your money? Should you buy gold for $1,700? Do you know why people buy gold for $1,700 or $1,900? One reason. They believe that Congress will never balance the budget, that we'll continue to throw away $1 trillion or $1.5 trillion a year, and continue to generate enough debt until ultimately we can't pay it back, and we destroy the value of your savings. That's what people do. Right now, I tell people, you can do other things besides buy gold. You can get your money out of America, go to somewhere else, Canada, New Zealand, Australia, Switzerland. Unfortunately, though, Switzerland doesn't want your money anymore. So many people have moved money to Switzerland, they don't want any more of it. But I don't even recommend that. Another thing you can do is buy farmland. Farmland that generates crops. That's another alternative. A lot of people are doing that too. That's why farmland has gone up so much in value. Another thing you can do is buy real estate. That's what I personally am doing. Just because I'm doing that, I don't recommend you do it necessarily, because I've lost money about every way you can think in investing. But real estate is not a perfect hedge against inflation, but it's about as good as anything else. And the best kind of real estate actually is residential, whether it's apartments or single-family homes. Why do I say that? Because the lease only lasts for 1 year. At the end of a year, if we have massive inflation in this country because of an incompetent government, you can, at the end of that year, you can raise the rent a lot. And so in my mind, owning commercial real estate, some commercial real estate, apartments, and I ask a lot of people in the business, here's my investment premise. If you don't understand an investment, don't do it. Don't make it. What do you know better? especially as a real estate professional, what do you know better than the value of the house that's next door to the one you live in? You know the school district, you know the economy, you know the values. There's no law of insider trading in the real estate business. You can trade on your professional knowledge, actually just like Congress does. I just find out now they can short sell ahead of time without getting in trouble like the rest of us do. Okay? Buying a single family house in my mind is a pretty good idea rather than buying gold. Okay, let's see what we've got here. So those are the big picture issues, the unanswerable questions that are causing people a lot of concern in this country. So let's look at the outlook for job growth, because when I talk to real estate people, whether they're residential or commercial, they're interested in the outlook for job growth. It's what drives the economy, what drives demand for houses and commercial real estate too. To do that, we'll break it down into three components. Our U.S. economy is made up of consumers, which represent about 65% of our economy, and the rest are businesses and government. So to me, I think it makes sense to break that down into three components and look at each of those three components to see how they're doing. So the first one I'd like to talk about are consumers. Like I said, 65% of our economy is based on you and me going to the shopping mall and spending every dime we've got. Well, what you see here with this slide is known as the Consumer Confidence Index put out by the Conference Board. And what you can see here is that consumer confidence, as we sit here today, is almost at a record low. And you know what? After 3 years of warning the American people about what's going on here, in my mind, this is actually good news, because the American people are waking up to reality. Even though they've been misled by a lot of misstatements coming out of Washington, D.C. from a variety of different directions. American people are waking up and realizing we are on the wrong track. It's no wonder that consumer confidence is at a record low level when you see surveys that say that 90% of the American people think we're going the wrong direction, and 90% of the American people think that Congress can never do anything to correct it. I would say that's almost 100%. I honestly haven't met one person in the last 18 months who thinks that Congress will do anything right to fix our problems. And you know what? I've stopped blaming Congress for this, because really it's the taxpayers' fault. We send our people to Washington year in and year out, and we get what we elect. And so really our congressmen are just advocates for you and me. You send your congressman to Washington to get all the goodies that he or she can get home. In College Station, we send our man or woman there, bring home all the toys. No congressman, no senator in the Washington, in our Washington politics up there, no congressman and no senator is sent to Washington, D.C. to maximize the economic opportunity of America for the future. They're all sent there for one reason: to be an advocate for you, which means bring home as much bacon as they can, and the more bacon they bring home, the more you like them. At some point, we're going to have to break down and say, you know what, Congressman, you know what, Senator, this year, don't bring home a lot of bacon. I'm worried about my children. You see, that's the problem right now. Everybody's got a lobby. Realtors have a lobby, doctors have a lobby, bankers have a lobby, farmers have a lobby, old folks have a lobby. Everybody has a lobby except for a 14-year-old kid that's going to need a job in 8 years, or a 22-year-old kid that's going to need a job in 6 months. Nobody's looking out for them. No congressman or senator is sent to Washington, D.C. to represent the economic future of our country, period. And that's going to have to change, and the only way that will change is when the voters start to prioritize and say, I think our economic future is worth more than the toys you bring home to my district. Until we have that fundamental sea change at the voter level, your Congress is doing exactly what you tell them to do. Consumers are paying off debt for the first time in 60 years. This economic recovery is going to be a little slower, even if Congress did all the right things, because typically in America, we always take on a little more debt. Buy a boat, buy a car, buy a little bigger house, buy a bunch of clothes, take a vacation. Up until 2 years ago, that's what we always did. And then all of a sudden, we realized we're too heavily in debt. So now we are paying down debt. That's good. That's what we should all do, live within our means. But when we all do that at the same time, that means there's a recession when 65% of our economy is based on us spending money at the mall. Our economy will not begin a significant upturn until people get right-sized, get their debt paid down to a comfortable level where they want to spend money again without a tax credit to buy a home or a tax credit to buy a car. Now I'm going to show you the next slide that is going to be the best news slide of everything I'm showing you today. This slide shows our household debt service as a percent of our disposable income. Now that's a mouthful. Debt service, all that means is the principal and interest you pay on your loans. And your disposable income is the money you have left after Uncle Sam takes whatever he takes. And what you can see here, this starts in 1980. Traditionally, Americans, when they have only 11% debt service, they think, it's time to go buy some carpet or something. Let's go out and buy something. And then when it gets up to 12%, they revalue and say, I think it's time to stop spending and save a little money. 3 years ago, we went crazy. I remember giving speeches and saying, folks, it appears there is no limit to how far Americans will go in debt, as we were going toward 14%. We found out there is a limit, but here's the good news. I was saying at that time, the U.S. economy will not have a real recovery until this gets back into the normal range. Well, this is kind of breathtaking to me. Look how fast the American people are deleveraging their balance sheet and getting this debt service as a percent of their income down into that range. This is surprisingly quick to me. And it looks like to me, if we continue this trajectory for another year, we will actually be at the low end of that range, which means that people will feel more likely to want to buy something because their debt service is taking a smaller portion of their total income. Now this is a function of three things. One is some people are saving more and paying off their loans. Others are refinancing loans at much lower interest rates, so the debt service is declining. And another portion are walking away from their loans and not paying them, either through bankruptcy or foreclosure. That's probably what's caused this to decline so rapidly. Whatever the reason is, this means that the American household is going to be more likely to want to start buying stuff next year than they have been for the last 2 or 3 years. We have some real problems in this country generating jobs. And I'm going to talk about why in a minute. This chart, I think, is the most disturbing one that I've seen. It's called the civilian participation rate. This is the total amount of Americans that want to work that are working. And it peaked out, what is this? It peaked out at about 67.5% or so, and it's been in a huge decline. There are just a lot of people in America that would like to have a job that aren't in the workforce any longer. At least they're not being reported in the workforce. This is our government's principal issue. It's not only the principal issue, it's the only issue. How can you create an environment that is attractive to small businesses and big businesses to start hiring people? There is no other issue of relevance to the American people right now, in my mind. And keep in mind, I'm an economist, so that means there's a 50% chance anything I say is wrong. Okay? But you could have got Alan Greenspan here today, and it'd be easy, he's 50% wrong too. So this U6 unemployment, this is people that are unemployed or underemployed, meaning they're working for $6 an hour somewhere instead of working where they used to be. It's about 16%. Your Congress can't back off. They can't shirk their duties here. Every year that goes by that we fail to encourage businesses to hire is another year that a whole bunch of people in this country go bankrupt. A whole bunch of businesses go bankrupt. Unemployment benefits are starting to drop. This is counterintuitive, but this is going to be actually good news. There's a little hidden secret in economics that doesn't seem to make it in the New York Times or other kinds of media very often. Do you know what happens when unemployment benefits start to decline? People go get a job. It's a dirty little secret we don't like to tell. As unemployment benefits start to decline, the unemployment rate will start to go down too. I was just in Laredo a couple of weeks ago, talked to a trucking guy. He said, I'm having a hard time hiring truckers down here. One of the guys told me that between the amount of money that he's making off his unemployment insurance claim benefits and the money he's making from another job that he's not reporting to the government, he would have to take a pay cut to come work for me. One of my wife's girlfriends, 32 years old, got laid off from a bank job, lives out in North Carolina. She's been on a paid holiday for 18 months, and now the benefits ran out. She's going to be going out looking for a job. I'm not saying everybody's in that case, but the fact is, simple fact, unemployment benefits, when they start going down, means the unemployment rate will start going down also. So that, as you can see, that's kind of where the consumer is today. Now let's talk about business. If we were in a normal economy right now, I would be telling you we are in the middle of a gigantic expansion. See, because America is known as a capitalistic country where profits are what we do. That's why I get up in the morning and put this coat and tie on and go to work. Collar's a little bit tight, but I do that to make money. It's called profit. Profit is what we do here in America. It's not something to be ashamed of or taxed away or demonized. But you ladies in the room don't have a coat and tie. I know you got something on that's uncomfortable I don't want to even know about, all right? But you understand what I'm doing, saying, right? It's what we do. We make money. You don't need a PhD to forecast job growth in a capitalistic country. When profits are up, people hire. When profits go flat, they stop hiring. And when profits start dropping, they start firing people, and they keep firing people until the profits turn the corner. So here's a question for Congress and for our president. And I'm not a Republican or a Democrat anymore. I don't care if your guy won or your guy lost. I just talk to business people. I don't want to know what your politics are. I'm interested in policies. I'm interested in the future of economic growth in this country because I want my kids to have a job in the future and not just a handout from a government subsidy somewhere. A real job where you compete in a global economy and actually offer customers a service and get paid for doing it. That's called capitalism. Corporate profits are at record levels again. Here's the question to ask your people that represent you in Congress. If corporate profits are at record level and corporate cash flows are at a record level, and there's $2 trillion in cash sitting on business balance sheets, and the cost of borrowing at the prime lending rate is 3.5%, why aren't businesses hiring? That's a powerful question. Here's the percent of small businesses that say they're going to hire in the next 6 months. This is the key to our future. This is the backbone of our economy. Small businesses employ about 60% of the workers in this country and create 80% of the jobs in this country. And this is the net percent of them that say we're going to hire in the next 6 months, and it's virtually zero. And it's been 0 or less for 2 years now. So next time you see a small business owner, ask them. Profits are up, cash flows are up, cost of money is cheap, you got cash, how come you're not hiring anybody? I do that all the time. Try it for size. Don't take my word for it. I work at A&M, I graduated from UT, and I got a beard, so nobody trusts me. I don't expect you to trust me either. Ask for yourself, find out. Don't take my word for any of this. Here's the number one issue I hear. Look at all of these industries that don't know what their future is going to be. It's not just healthcare. It's not just your doctor or your hospital or the man or woman that sells you healthcare insurance that are all being demonized. We're going to close electric utility generating plants in Dallas. We're not going to do a pipeline from Canada down to the U.S. and create a bunch of construction jobs, and Canada's going to redirect the pipeline to China. That's working out pretty good. We're hammering coal companies. Our banks and mortgage lenders, 22 pages of Dodd-Frank nightmare. 400 regulations, of which half of them haven't even been written yet. They don't have a clue what their future is going to be like, other than the cost of doing business is going to be enormous. That's going to make some people feel really good that bankers' cost of doing business is going way up. That's because some people cheated the American people and should be in jail. But for the thousands of bankers in this country that play by the rules and serve their local communities, they should not be punished with 2,200 pages of nightmare regulations. Put a few people in jail and let the other people do business like they know. The small banks in our country are in trouble from regulation. The cost of maintaining this regulation is going to drive a lot of our small businesses out, small banks out of our country. And you know what? If you live in a smaller town, that small bank in your town, guess who makes the small business loans in your community? You think a gigantic global bank is interested in making a loan in Seguin? Maybe, maybe not. But I guarantee you the local banker is a lot more interested. And if we drive him or her out of business because the regulatory costs got so high they couldn't stay, who's going to make a business loan in those small communities going forward? Ask those kinds of questions. How about Boeing? They want to build a plant in South Carolina. They're going to be sued by the National Labor Relations Board for doing it. And the human resource guy had the audacity to be honest and say, you know, we really would like to move away from Seattle to South Carolina because we're having a difficult time dealing with the work stoppages here from the unionized labor. Can you imagine that? Treasonous statement? That man should be shot. That's treasonous to talk like that. It's also called business. And you know what businesses do when they get treated badly enough, long enough? They go to another country. Boeing doesn't need to be here. That's what a lot of other businesses have done too. You treat them bad enough, they leave the country or they quit and just give up. Corporate hiring, we had some momentum going in this country through the first half of this year until Congress blew up. Remember that debt ceiling crisis everybody thought about? We were never going to default on our loans. That was all theater to try to get some leverage to get rid of an $8 trillion projected deficit. $8 trillion that we can't pay for in the next 10 years or so. And so we had all this high drama that we were going to default on our debt, but by having that high drama, we were actually going to cut some of that $8 trillion in deficit. You know what happened? After all that drama, they cut $20 billion. That's like a penny. It's a waste of time. That drove American confidence out. Okay, so now we've got this ridiculous sham of a super committee that they're going to do it. Well, if they do it, it's only going to be $1.2 trillion, which is nothing out of $8 trillion. And they're not going to do that either. They're not going to cut anything. So what you see is we have a complete failure in Washington, D.C. to manage this massive budget deficit situation. And what that means is if we keep doing that long enough, we will end up exactly like Greece, Italy, and Spain. The beauty of what we've got going now is they are ahead of us by 5 or 10 years. So we're getting to see what our future will look like ahead of time. And we will either decide to replicate that exactly, which means never balance our budgets, and just continue to get deeper and deeper in debt till ultimately we can't find anybody else to buy our debt, and we will be in exactly the same situation they are. I think that's what most Americans are hopeful, is that there's somebody in Washington, D.C. that will lay down the guns and say, you know what, this isn't a Republican and Democrat issue, this is an American issue. The future of our country is bigger than a tax credit for whatever you want to have it. Your children and grandchildren need to have a future too. And whether you get every penny for your Social Security or Medicare or your agricultural subsidy or your mortgage interest deduction or your whatever else, whatever your soup de jour is, your favorite subsidy is, we're all going to have to give a little. We're going to have to pay a little more in taxes, and we're going to have to cut everything else, period. And my theory is that unless everybody takes a little bit of a sacrifice, nobody will want to. And right now, as we know it here today, all the adults in the country know we need to do something. We're on the wrong path. but nobody wants to share in the pain. It's just let somebody else do it. And until we decide to knuckle down, join together as a country, make a little sacrifice today for the future of our country, we'll just keep getting more and more in debt, and every year the calendar goes by, we'll be closer and closer to what you're seeing in Europe right now. This chart shows businesses are starting, the big businesses are starting to lose energy for hiring. I was talking at the first year about, hey, this is cool. 51% of large businesses are going to hire and only 11% are going to fire. Well, after all of this other stuff that's been going on in the second half of the year, I've already mentioned to you, small businesses, net percent want to hire is about 0, and now look what's happening to big business. It's no longer 51%, it's 36%, and instead of 11% wanting to fire, it's up to 24%. Congress is running out of time. If you haven't read my blogs, I've got blogs on a lot of this stuff, including Congress is running out of time, including what can we learn from Greece, and these sorts of issues. I'd encourage you to take a look at it. Go to the Real Estate Center's website. On our homepage, it says blog, and just push the button. Even I can access that, and I don't have an iPhone.